Okay, we'll start with the Mangalacharan. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeyam Shri Guru Shri Yudapadakalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavascha Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Stamste Jivam Sadvitam Saudutam Paljana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamcha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandhu Jagatpati Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namaste तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये पंचकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्यः च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय Hare Krishna. Today's title is Karmaṇy Evādhikāras, about the right of action. In Gita chapter 2, 2.47, Krishna says, Karmaṇy Evādhikāras ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phaleheturvur ma te sangosto karmani. You have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of action. Never consider yourself the cause of the results of your activities and never be attached to not doing your duty. So as we know, from chapter 2 onwards, in 2.7, when Arjuna surrenders to Krishna as a disciple, then from there the actual discourse of the Gita starts. And even in chapter 2, the first half of chapter 2 is focused on Sankhya Yoga, where Krishna is actually giving the distinction between the material body and the soul, followed by the second half, in which Krishna talks about how Arjuna should perform his duty without being attached to the results in order to avoid further entanglement with all the material denominations and so on. So this was also because, as we have also observed from chapter 1, in chapter 1 it is a complete monologue by Arjuna alone. He alone keeps complaining to Krishna about how can I kill my grandfather, father, teacher and friends. So Arjuna was completely bewildered about his duty because he was identifying himself in terms of all the material designations. So in chapter 2, Lord Krishna starts to explain to Arjuna about how he should perform his duty without being bound by all these material designations. And in this verse, Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna to perform his duty as a matter of duty without being attached to the fruits of his actions or the results, because this was mainly the cause for Arjuna's bewilderment in chapter 1, because he was completely confused when he started thinking about what would happen if he kills all his relatives. So it was quite strange for someone like Arjuna, who is also known as Dhananjaya. He has been very famous for winning so much wealth in all his in all the wars he had participated before the Battle of Kurukshetra. So there was actually no reason for him to be bewildered. But if he did not if he was not put into that position, we would not be able to study the discourse of the Gita. So it all happened due to the supreme will of the Supreme Lord. And this verse is also one of the most popular, or actually the most popular verse of the Gita, because very often people tend to share this verse also on social media, saying that Gita is all about doing your duty without worrying about the results. Actually, um, there are three main parts of the Gita. If we divide the 18 chapters, the first 6 chapters focus on Karma Yoga, the middle 6 chapters are focused on Bhakti Yoga, and the last 6 chapters are focused on Jnana Yoga. So um, this part, which appears in chapter 2, it is only from the part from the Karma Yoga portion. Ultimately, what really matters is that we develop devotional service towards Krishna, even when we are engaged in our material duties. And therefore, it is important to study all the 18 chapters and not simply pick and choose uh, 1 or 2 chapters or 1 or 2 verses. Though this is indeed a very important verse, but it is not the only verse that is important. And most of the time, a lot of self-proclaimed intellectuals, they also make fun of this verse, because since this verse is the most popularly shared verse on social media, especially on WhatsApp University. So even the self-proclaimed intellectuals, they also uh, often try to mock the Gita simply by looking at this one verse alone. So they often say that, okay, if you don't have to worry about the results, so is Krishna telling us that we should work, but we should not get our salary? So lot of self-proclaimed intellectuals, they tend to come up with such extremely brilliant arguments. But we all know that in all the countries there are labor laws, and the labor laws strictly require that all the workers be paid according to their efforts. So it's not that those self-proclaimed intellectuals don't know about these labor laws. It's just that their main agenda is to make fun of Hinduism, and therefore they'll keep doing such things, even without realizing that they are only exposing their true intellectual capacity. Purport. There are three considerations here: prescribed duties, capricious work, and inaction. Prescribed duties are activities enjoined in terms of one's acquired modes of material nature. Capricious work refers to actions without the sanction of authority, and inaction means not performing one's prescribed duties. One who is attached to the result of his work is also the enjoyer or sufferer of the result of such actions. Very often we see that this is especially true in the case of believers also. Very often we tend to praise ourselves only whenever we succeed in our endeavors. We rarely give any appreciation to Krishna. But whenever things go wrong, there's always the tendency to blame God first. This is especially true in the case of believers, and also in the case of non-believers. They create an excuse for them being non-believers by saying that whenever things go wrong, they'll tend to attribute that to God, but they'll never give any credit to God whenever they themselves succeed at something. So This is what happens when we are bewildered to the point where we always tend to consider ourselves as the sole cause of the results of our action. Whenever we are too obsessed with the results of our actions, then we have to be the enjoyer or sufferer of the result of such actions. So the more we are obsessed with the results of actions, when things go wrong, then naturally we'll have to suffer the undesirable consequences of the action, because that is part of the influence of the modes of material nature. Since we are completely bewildered and deluded by the modes of material nature, so we will always have this tendency to consider ourselves as the sole proprietor. From Ishopanishad, we learn that only Krishna is the sole and supreme proprietor, and as long as we do not understand that fact, we will always be in ignorance. So for any person who is not in Krishna consciousness, so that person will naturally have the tendency, due to the influence of the modes of material nature, to consider himself as the sole proprietor and the sole reason for all his success and for all his successes. But it has to apply to failures also. But due to our bewilderment, we always refuse to take any blame for the failures that happen. We only want to take the credit for the success that we achieved. Whenever there's a failure, we blame it on God. So it is all due to the influence of Maya. And the only cure for it, as in all the other cases, is Krishna consciousness. As far as prescribed duties are concerned, they can be fitted into three subdivisions, namely routine work, emergency work, and desired activities. Routine work, performed as an obligation in terms of the scriptural injunctions, without desire for results, is action in the mode of goodness. Work with results becomes the cause of bondage. Therefore, such work is not auspicious. So as long as we perform our prescribed duties without being obsessed with the results of our action, we can always purify ourselves to be in the mode of goodness. And it should also be remembered, as we have seen from many of our previous sessions, that being in the mode of goodness alone is not enough. We have to further elevate ourselves to the point of transcendence, that is to even go beyond the mode of goodness. So as long as we remain bound by the fruits of our actions, we can never elevate ourselves to the mode of goodness. Being obsessed with the fruits of action will only bind us in the mode of passion. Even now itself, since we have all taken this human form of life, this human form of life itself is an indication that we are all by default, we are all predominantly influenced by the mode of passion. That's why we have actually taken this human birth. Otherwise, if we were dominated by the mode of ignorance, we would have ended up in the animal kingdom. But of course, even after getting this human form of life, a lot of people still choose to live like animals. So in their next birth, they'll most likely find themselves in the animal kingdom, because that's what Krishna says in chapter 14 of the Gita. So now with this human form of life, this is an indication that by nature we are all predominantly influenced by the mode of passion, and therefore we are all by default driven by the desire to always perform fruitive activities. So that's why those who are not in Krishna consciousness, they always tend to think that money is everything. So for them, devotional service is a waste of time. We should always utilize all our time to earn more money. So this is their understanding. Unfortunately, because they are completely being puppeted by Maya through the three modes of material nature. But since we have attained this human form of life, our acharyas clearly say that we have to utilize this precious opportunity to be always engaged in devotional service so that we can completely elevate ourselves from this material bondage. For those who are not, for those who do not understand the importance of this human form of life, for those who think that money is everything, so they can never elevate themselves from the mode of passion to goodness, and from that to pure goodness. It's either they are going to remain stuck in the mode of passion, or worse still, they might even get degraded to the mode of ignorance, which means that they are going to end up in the animal kingdom in their next life. So that would be completely disastrous. That would be completely disastrous in the sense that after being blessed with this wonderful opportunity, if we don't utilize it and if we further degrade ourselves to such an extent, then we may not get this precious opportunity ever again. So through Krishna consciousness, we can understand that though we are obliged to always perform our material duties, but we should also remember that being detached from the fruits of action is the only way to avoid further entanglement into the material bondage. So that is what Prabhupada is also trying explaining through this purport. Because even if we look at it from another perspective, regardless of how much wealth a person may accumulate, that person cannot take all his wealth with him. So even after his departure, that material wealth may not last too long. So whatever plans the person had in the past, they may not really materialize in the future. On the contrary, that person who got this precious human form of life had only ended up messing up the wonderful opportunity, and due to his obsession of accumulating too much material wealth, he had completely squandered the opportunity to be engaged in spiritual inquiry and devotional service. So this obsession towards material wealth and the fruits of action will always blind us from the need to perform spiritual inquiry. Only when we are not blinded by the mode of passion in the form of obsession towards material wealth, only then we will be engaged in spiritual inquiry, and we'll get the chance to get acquainted to Krishna consciousness at least. Otherwise, the more we are blinded by the mode of passion, it will never allow us to further elevate ourselves to the mode of goodness than pure goodness. It will only either make us remain in the mode of passion, or even further degrade us to the mode of ignorance. However, it is to be remembered that Lord Krishna does not prohibit us from performing our material duties. It is just that we have to perform our material duties, but in a detached manner. So, being engaged in spiritual life does not mean escapism. So, from verse 2.2 itself, the first verse spoken by Lord Krishna, Lord Krishna says, Kutasva Kasmala Vidam, Visime Samupasitam, Anarya Justam Asvargyam, Akirtikaram Arjuna. Lord Krishna admonishes Arjuna for his refusal to fight. Lord Krishna describes Lord Krishna describes Arjuna's actions, his inaction, his refusal to fight as Anarya Justam Asvargyam Akirtikaram. So meaning Arjuna's refusal to fight, Arjuna's refusal to perform his material duty was described as Anarya Justam, the acts of an uncivilized man. Asvargyam, it is described as acts which do not lead to the heavenly planets. Akirtikaram, Arjuna's refusal was also described as acts which do not lead to fame. They only lead to infamy. So Lord Krishna clearly wants us to perform our material duties. It's just that we should not be too obsessed with the fruits of action. Rather, we should always direct ourselves to the spiritual side and not to further entangle ourselves into the material bondage. Arjuna was therefore advised by Lord to fight as a matter of duty without attachment to the result. His non-participation in the battle is another side of attachment to not doing his duty. Such attachment never leads one to the path of salvation. Any attachment, positive or negative, is cause for bondage. Inaction is sinful. Therefore, fighting as a matter of duty was the only auspicious path of salvation for Arjuna. So, even in our case, regardless of the fact of whether we, especially for those who are engaged in spiritual life, it is also important for us to perform our material duties as a matter of duty without being too obsessed with the fruits of action. 2.48 Yogasta Kuru Karmaṇy Sangam Tyaktva Dhananjaya Siddha Siddhyo Samobhutva Samatvam Yoga Uchyate. Perform your duty equipoised, O Arjuna, abandoning all attachment to success or failure. Such equanimity is called yoga. So being able to perform our duty without being worried about the fruits of action, that is regarded as yoga, as described by Lord Krishna. So when we perform our material duties according to how Lord Krishna has described, so we can even spiritualize our material duties. So further explanation regarding why a person should be focused on doing only his duty and not worry about the fruits of action is also further described in chapter 18.13. Panchaitani Mahabhavo Karanani Nibodame Sankhye Kritante Proktani Sittaye Sarva Karmanam. O mighty Arjuna, according to the Vedanta, there are 5 causes for the accomplishment of all action. Now learn of these from me. 18.14 Adhishtanam Tatakarta Karanam Chaprata Gudam Vidas Chapratak Chesta Devam Saivalta Panchamam. The place of action, the body, the performer, the various senses, the many different kinds of endeavor, and ultimately the supersoul. These are the 5 factors of action. The word Adhishtanam refers to the body. The soul within the body is the doer, karta. The instruments of action are the senses, For each and every action, there is a different endeavor. But all one's activities depend on the will of the super soul, who is seated within the heart as a friend. The Supreme Lord is the super cause. So out of the 5 factors of action, the super soul, who is seated in our hearts, he is the super cause. Out of all the 5, the super soul is the also the most important factor, because he always observes our actions, and he is also described as Upadrasta Anumanta. In Gita chapter 13, there's a verse spoken by Krishna, Upadrasta Anumanta cha balta bhokta maheshwara paramatmeti chapyukta deyesmin purusha paraha. The Paramatma is described as Upadrasta Anumanta, observer and also the permitter. Because we as spirit souls, we have been taking many different types of birth, meaning we have been occupying many different material bodies since time immemorial. And our spirit soul, the Paramatma, always accompanies us within our heart. So the spirit soul is always accompanied by the Paramatma in all the births, all the different births. So the observer, the Paramatma, who is also the observer, he knows about all our activities that we have performed when we were occupying all the different material bodies since time immemorial. So he has been observing all our activities, and he has been rewarding us accordingly. And now we have attained this human form of life due to our past activities. And from here, whether we get another human form of life, or whether we get back our original transcendental body, or whether we get a degraded form of life, it all depends on what we are doing now. So the Paramatma is always observing our activities, and he is also described as the Chaita Guru, because unlike the Shiksha Guru and Diksha Guru, we get their association only during very specific period of time, and that too for a very limited period of time. But our Chaita Guru accompanies us always, non-stop. So that's how the Chaita Guru, the Paramatma, is very special, and therefore he is the super cause of all our activities. The person who is acting in Krishna consciousness under the direction of the super soul, situated within the heart, is naturally not bound by any activity. So if we follow the instructions of Krishna, we will not be bound by any activity, and therefore we will not further entangle ourselves in the material bondage. We can liberate ourselves, on the contrary. Everything is dependent on the supreme will, the super soul, the supreme personality of Godhead. 18.15, whatever right or wrong action a man performs by body, mind, or speech is caused by these 5 factors. Therefore, one who thinks himself the only doer, not considering the 5 factors, is certainly not very intelligent and cannot see things as they are. So our usual tendency is that we are always obsessed with the fruits of our actions, and we always attribute whatever success we achieve only to ourselves due to our ignorance. we always claim for the credit whenever we succeed, and whenever we fail, the tendency is always to blame God or blame everyone else except ourselves. So this is also a sign of ignorance, or it is also due to the influence of Maya. So Maya causes such blindness which prevents us from seeing the supreme will of the Supreme Lord. Very often, even when we fail in our endeavors, the Supreme Lord actually makes it a much smoother landing for us, because things could have been worse, but the Supreme Lord, being our eternal well-wisher, he always makes it at least a smooth landing for us. So for those who are completely bewildered by Maya, they are not able to see this. They are not able to see the super soul as the super cause of all our actions. But if we realize the importance of the super soul as one of the most important of the 5 factors, then we will be able to understand that even when we fail in our endeavors, the Supreme Lord is like he knows better, as we shall see later, because even in our experience we might have felt that though we might have done something out of our own will, after some time we might realize that I shouldn't have done that. I've only wasted my time. So we might have impressions like that. But the super soul is never wrong. He knows what is best for us more than we ourselves, as we shall see later why. 18.17. One who is not motivated by false ego, whose intelligence is not entangled, though he kills men in this world, does not kill, nor is he bound by his actions. Now, the self-proclaimed intellectuals, they might also make fun of this verse, saying that why Krishna is saying that a person who kills does not kill. So this verse was clearly spoken in the context of killing in the battlefield, especially in the context related to Arjuna's duty as a warrior. So even in the modern context, any soldier who kills the enemies, he will not be punished by the government. Rather, he would be rewarded by the government for his efforts. But if the same soldier kills someone else because of some personal disputes, then the same soldier who was rewarded by the government, the same government will send him to jail. So that is what is meant through this verse. When we perform our actions in a detached manner, then we will not be bound by the reactions of those actions. Rather, if we are too obsessed with the fruits of the actions, then we will be affected by the reactions, which lead to further entanglement. 18.18. Knowledge, the object of knowledge, and the knower are the 3 factors that motivate action. The senses, the work, and the doer are the 3 constituents of action. Now, in chapter 18 also, there are several important aspects related to work, which have been described according to the 3 modes. We know that in chapter 14, is actually an exclusive chapter dedicated to the 3 modes of material nature. But even before chapter 14, in many of the chapters, there are at least indirect references to the 3 modes of material nature. And even after chapter 14, in chapters 16, 17, and also in 18, there are many different aspects related to work and renunciation, which have been described by Krishna according to the 3 modes. So in this chapter also, Krishna talks about knowledge, knower, work, and also the worker in the 3 modes. According to the 3 different modes of material nature, there are 3 kinds of knowledge, action, and performer of action. Now, hear of them from me. So it is important to understand these aspects of knowledge, action, and performer of action, or knowledge, work, and worker in the 3 different modes, in order for us to understand which is the best way to perform work, so that we are not bound by the reactions, and therefore we will not be further entangled by material bondage. First, Krishna talks about knowledge in the three modes, 18.20. That knowledge by which one undivided spiritual nature is seen in all living entities, though they are divided into innumerable forms, you should understand to be in the mode of goodness. That knowledge by which one sees that in every different body, there is a different type of living entity, you should understand to be in the mode of passion. And that knowledge by which one is attached to one kind of work as the all in all, without knowledge of the truth, and which is very meager, is said to be in the mode of darkness. So these are the descriptions of knowledge according to the three different modes. Action in the three modes. That action which is regulated and which is performed without attachment, without love or hatred, and without desire for fruitive results is said to be in the mode of goodness. As we have already seen from the purport for 2.47, as long as we are attached to the fruits of action, we will only remain in the mode of passion. We can only elevate ourselves to the mode of goodness by being detached from the fruits of action. So only by elevating ourselves to the mode of goodness, only then we can at least think about how to transcend the modes towards pure goodness or Shuddha Sattva. So that's why it is extremely important for a person in Krishna consciousness to always cultivate this habit of working only as a matter of duty and not being too obsessed with the fruits of action. But action performed with great effort by one seeking to gratify his senses and enacted from a sense of false ego is called action in the mode of passion. So this is the reason why we always have the natural tendency to claim credit whenever we succeed, but we blame everyone else, including God, only when we fail, because there's always the this urge for sense gratification enacted from a sense of false ego. So as long as we are trapped in this position, influenced by the mode of passion, it will only lead to further misery, especially whenever we fail, and we can never attain the peace of mind and focus required to practice Krishna consciousness. We should always understand that whatever material duties that we are doing now, they are not going to help us in our spiritual journey. Only the devotional service that we do will help us. However, we can still spiritualize even our material duties by performing our material duties according to the Krishna conscious way, as how Krishna has explained, simply by being detached from the fruits of action. That action performed in illusion, in disregard of scriptural injunctions, and without concern for future bondage or for violence or distress caused to others is said to be in the mode of ignorance. So when we talk about work in the mode of passion, at least that refers to doing the prescribed duties, but with the attachment for the fruits of action. But work in the mode of ignorance refers to all the forbidden actions which are directly forbidden by the scriptures. Worker in the three modes: one who performs his duty without association with the modes of material nature, without false ego, with great determination and enthusiasm, and without wavering in success or failure, is said to be a worker in the mode of goodness. So roughly this translates to the worker who performs actions in the mode of goodness, what we have already seen earlier. As long as we remain detached from the fruits of action, we will remain unwavering in success or failure. So once we are situated in that stage, then it is a lot more easier to elevate ourselves towards the mode of transcendence. The worker who is attached to work and the fruits of work, desiring to enjoy those fruits, and who is greedy, always envious, impure, and moved by joy and sorrow, is said to be in the mode of passion. So for the passionate workers, that is our natural tendency, as we are born in this human form of life. So our natural tendency is to be in this mode of passion, and therefore there's always the natural tendency to be obsessed with the fruits of action. And therefore, as long as we are trapped by this obsession, we will always be dominated by the dualities of success and failure, and therefore we will always be affected by joy and sorrow. So the only solution for that is to elevate ourselves towards the mode of goodness by being detached from the fruits of action. The worker who is always engaged in work against the injunctions of the scripture, who is materialistic, obstinate, cheating, and expert in insulting others, and who is lazy, always morose, and procrastinating, is said to be a worker in the mode of ignorance. So this type of worker is the person who has no knowledge about knowledge itself, and also no knowledge about work also. So that's why it is important to distinguish between all these different aspects of knowledge, work, and worker according to 3 different modes, so that we can identify how to perform our work with the right knowledge and also according to the mode of goodness. In 3.27, Krishna says, Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasya ankara vimudatma kartami manyate. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the 3 modes of material nature. So by default, for any person who is not in Krishna consciousness, for the person who is naturally driven by the influence of the 3 modes of material nature, so that person is always under the influence of the 3 modes of material nature, and he always tends to think that he himself is the doer. He himself is the sole doer and proprietor. So for such people, they cannot understand regarding the 5 factors of action, with the super soul being the super cause among the 5 factors. So that is the biggest drawback of being bewildered by Maya. And the only antidote for that is Krishna consciousness. 2 persons, one in Krishna consciousness and another in material consciousness, working on the same level, may appear to be working on the same platform, but there is a wide gulf of difference in their respective positions. The person in material consciousness is convinced by false ego that he is the doer of everything, that he is the sole doer and sole proprietor. He does not know that the mechanism of the body is produced by material nature. He has no knowledge that ultimately he is under the control of Krishna. So whatever we get from material nature, like this material body, many of the so-called rationalists or atheists, they always attribute everything to nature. But due to their ignorance, they are not able to see that even nature itself is merely a byproduct of Krishna's inferior energy. So without such knowledge, they are not aware that even they are also under the control of Krishna through his inferior energy. As a result, such a person takes all credit for doing everything independently, and that is the symptom of his nescience. So when a person wants to take credit for whatever success he gains, then he should also take the blame when things go wrong. But the nature of the bewildered soul is such that we will only want to take credit for the success that we gain, but we will blame everyone else, including God, whenever we fail. So that is the result of bewilderment by material nature. he does not know that this gross and subtle body is the creation of material nature under the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, through Krishna consciousness, all this type of ignorance can be remedied. When we are in Krishna consciousness, we can understand that even this material body, whether it's the gross body or subtle body, these are all parts of Krishna's inferior energy, and therefore we can only attain happiness if we employ these tools that we have acquired. We can only attain happiness by putting them to work for the pleasure of Krishna. So that is the essence of Krishna consciousness. The ignorant man forgets that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is known as Rishikesha, or the master of the senses. This is due to the person's long misuse of his senses in sense gratification since time immemorial. Even now, when we have this in our human form of life, a lot of people do not understand that Krishna is the master of the senses, because even our material senses come from his inferior material energy. And this is due to our long misuse of the senses. Even before this, when we were in all the other different material bodies, even since time immemorial, in all the different material bodies, we have always been so obsessed with sense gratification to the point where we have completely forgotten that Krishna is the master of the senses, Rishikesha. And at least now, through this human form of life, we have the opportunity to understand the truth so that we can liberate ourselves from our past mistakes. However, not everyone is willing to accept their mistakes, also due to them being bewildered by the false ego. Now, about the supreme will of the Supreme Lord or the Super Soul. When we were talking about the 5 factors earlier, I said that ultimately the Super Soul is the super cause of all our actions, and it is he who knows best what is good for us, mainly because he is the Super Soul who has been accompanying us since time immemorial, even when we were taking birth in all the different material bodies. Even this present existence, our existence as human beings, this is also a reward given to us by the Super Soul, because he has been observing all our activities, and therefore only he knows what is best for us. So we should always acknowledge his influence as the super cause among the 5 factors. As long as we refuse to acknowledge the influence of the Super Soul and refuse to acknowledge his importance, we will always remain in ignorance, and it will only lead to further misery. Why? We shall see now. In chapter 4, starting from 4.1, Krishna explains to Arjuna about how he first conveyed the knowledge of the Gita to Vivaswan, and about how the knowledge of the Gita was passed on through disciplic succession. So after the first 3 verses in chapter 4, Arjuna asks in 4.4, the sun god Vivaswan is senior by birth to you. How am I to understand that in the beginning you instructed these signs to him? The personality of Godhead said, many, many births, both you and I have passed. I can remember all of them, but you cannot, O subduer of the enemy. Although I am unborn and my transcendental body never deteriorates, and although I am the Lord of all living entities, I still appear in every millennium in my original transcendental form. So, in 4.6, Krishna clearly explains to Arjuna that he is always able to remember whatever that has been happening in the past. We cannot even remember what happened yesterday or 2 days back, but the super soul who accompanies us in our hearts since time immemorial, when as we have been taking all the different material bodies, the super soul has been accompanying us, and he has been observing everything that we have been doing, and he remembers everything, and he also knows what is going to happen in the future. And therefore the super soul is our best well-wisher, and that's why we must accept that his influence in our actions is also equally important. We should give importance to that super cause among the 5 factors. 7.26 Vedāṁ Samitirani Vatmanani Charjuna Bhavishyani Sabhutani Mantu Vedana Kashchana. O Arjuna, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, I know everything that has happened in the past, all that is happening in the present, and all things that are yet to come. I also know all living entities, but me no one knows. So as long as we refuse to acknowledge the importance of the super soul being the super cause among the 5 factors, so we will always remain in ignorance, and that will only lead to further misery. In 5.29, also Krishna has given the formula for peace. Bhoktaram yatin tapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram surdam sarvabhutanam nyatva mam shanti mrichati. A person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the supreme lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material miseries. So we must realize that the Supreme Lord is the well-wisher of all living entities, not just for human beings, for all living entities, for all the jivas, because the Supreme Lord sees us only as his eternal fragmental parts. So he does not discriminate between the spirit souls. The different types of bodies taken by every spirit soul is only like a uniform, but the Supreme Lord sees us only as spirit souls equally. So he is the eternal well-wisher of all living entities, and that's why we also have to acknowledge his influence as the super cause among the 5 factors of action. So in 15.7 also, Lord Krishna identifies us as his eternal fragmental parts, as his spirit souls that have emerged as his eternal fragmental parts. So since we are all part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, we can never attain happiness if we work for our pleasure. We must work for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. That's what Narada Muni had said to the Prachetas in Srimad Bhagavatam 431.14. Yata tarur mula nishechanena tripyanti tatchanda bujopashaka pranopahara chatendriyanam tataiva sarvaranam achuteja. As pouring water on the root of a tree energizes the trunk, branches, twigs, and everything else, and as supplying food to the stomach enlivens the senses and limbs of the body, simply worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead through devotional service automatically satisfies the demigods who are parts of that Supreme Personality. So in this verse, Narada Muni is specifically referring to how worshipping the Supreme Lord also satisfies the demigods, but not just the demigod, even we ourselves, we are also part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. So just as we have to pour water to the roots to nourish a tree, and we have to supply food to the stomach, we cannot supply food to other organs and expect the body to get nourished. So similarly, we as part and parcel of Krishna, we ourselves, we can only experience happiness and bliss only if we work for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. So that is that's what we can easily understand from the analogies given here, like watering the root of a tree. So when we are trying to always work for our own pleasure, it is just like watering the leaves. So that is certainly not very intelligent. We can only attain bliss when we water the root by working for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. So in order to always work for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Lord does not prohibit us from being engaged in our material duties. Rather, he clearly says in 8.7, Tasmat Sarveshu Karishu, Ma Manusmana Yudhyacha, Mai Arpita Manobuddhir, Ma Me Vaishasya Asamshaya. Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna, and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting with your activities dedicated to me and your mind and intelligence fixed on me. You will attain me without doubt. So we just have to perform our duties, but at the same time remember the Supreme Lord always. This instruction to Arjuna is very important for all men engaged in material activities. So generally it applies to all of us. The Lord does not say that one should give up his prescribed duties or engagements. One can continue them and at the same time think of Krishna by chanting Hare Krishna. This will free one from material contamination and engage the mind and intelligence in Krishna. By chanting Krishna's names, one will be transferred to the supreme planet, Krishna Loka, without a doubt. So it is as simple as that. We just have to do our material duties as a matter of duty and not be too obsessed with those with those results. Rather, we should transform all our obsession towards the Supreme Lord only. Because even when we are too worried, or when we are always pondering about the results of our actions, especially those related to our material duties, we are wasting a lot of precious time, because each and every single moment is meant to be spent remembering only the Supreme Lord. Otherwise, we are only going to further entangle ourselves in the material bondage. 8.8 Abhyasa Yoga Yuktena Chetasa Nanigamina Paramam Purusham Divyam Yati Patanu Chintayan. He who meditates on me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged in remembering me. Undeviated from the path, he, O Partha, is sure to reach me. In this verse, Lord Krishna stresses the importance of remembering him. One's memory of Krishna is revived by chanting the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna. By this practice of chanting and hearing, one's ear, tongue, and mind are engaged. This mystic meditation practice is very easy to practice, and it helps one attain the Supreme Lord. So, apart from performing our daily material duties, we just have to actually we have to be engaged in devotional service and perform our material duties at the same time. The general understanding is that very often people lay more emphasis to the material duties first, but we should actually focus on devotional service, and even our material duties can be seen as an opportunity to also be done at the same time while remembering the Supreme Lord. The devotee can constantly think of the object of worship, the Supreme Lord, by chanting Hare Krishna. This practice will purify him, and at the end of his life, due to his constant chanting, he will be transferred to the kingdom of God. The mind is fickle, and therefore it is necessary to engage the mind by force to think of Krishna. So this has also been mentioned by Arjuna in chapter 6, 6.33, 6.34. Arjuna complains to Krishna saying that the mind is fickle, and it is very important to control. It is totally impossible to control the mind. To which Lord Krishna replies in 6.35 that through practice and detachment, one can easily control the mind through abhyasa and vairagya. Also in that was in 6.35 and also in 8.8, Lord Krishna talks about the importance of abhyasa. So abhyasa should be something that we perform daily, unfailingly. So that's why it is important to always perform our sadhana daily, unfailingly, and not occasionally. So we can easily be engaged in remembering the Lord always, even while performing our material duties, as long as we perform the Navaveda Bhakti, as mentioned by Prahlad Maharaj. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam Padasevanam Archanam Vandanam Dasyam Shakyam Atmanivedam. Prahlad Maharaj said, hearing and chanting about the transcendental holy name, form, qualities, paraphernalia, and pastimes of Lord Vishnu, remembering them, serving the lotus feet of the Lord, offering the Lord respectful worship with 16 types of paraphernalia, offering prayers to the Lord, becoming his servant, considering the Lord one's best friend, and surrendering everything unto him. In other words, serving him with the body, mind, and words. These 9 processes are accepted as pure devotional service. However, in many of Prabhupada's purport, Prabhupada has mentioned that it is not always required for us to perform all these 9 types of bhakti. Even as long as we perform our chanting, when we are chanting, we are chanting, we are listening, and we are also remembering the Lord. So even by doing our regular chanting, we are performing 3 types of bhakti. And of course, hearing about the Lord's pastimes by attending discourses of the Gita and Bhagavatam. So that is also additional. We can further intensify our bhakti by being engaged in such hearing or even speaking about Krishna Katha. One who has dedicated his life to the service of Krishna through these 9 methods should be understood to be the most learned person, for he has acquired complete knowledge. So as long as we follow the Navaveda Bhakti, not necessarily 9, but a combination of 2 or 3, even by simply performing our basic sadhana, we can complete at least 3 or 4, or maybe even more than that. So by always being engaged in the Navaveda Bhakti, we can always train ourselves to remember the Supreme Lord, even while being engaged in our material duties. So this will gradually eliminate whatever obsession or the natural tendency of the mode of passion to be obsessed with the fruits of action. So as we gradually get cleansed of the influence of the mode of passion, we can always improve ourselves to work in the mode of goodness and slowly transcend the modes towards pure goodness. Now, just some additional information. There's this book by Major General G.D. Bakshi, Bose or Gandhi, Who Got India Her Freedom. So this in this book, there are a lot of detailed explanation regarding how Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was the one who truly liberated India, contrary to the popular myth that a certain manufactured Mahatma was the one who got India independence. Though he was the true liberator of India, unfortunately, not many people know about him, not even the basic details. So he was actually the first Prime Minister of undivided India, declared in 1943. He was also the president of the Congress, Indian National Congress, but as usual, the manufactured Mahatma did not allow him to function independently, and therefore he had to form the All India Forward Bloc, and then the manufactured Mahatma would always interfere in his path. So he had to find his own way to fight against the British. Unlike the manufactured Mahatma always wanted Indians to fight for the British. And ironically, he is called the greatest freedom fighter. But Netaji wanted Indians to fight against the British, but nobody knows about him. Actually, the reason why I'm talking about Netaji is because in line with the title of this session, Karmaṇy Evādhikāras, as I mentioned earlier, 2.47 is actually one of the most popular verses from the Gita. And 2 weeks back, we saw how the manufactured Mahatma came up with so much garbage in the name of commentary about the Gita. However, Netaji is different because he did not waste time writing his own commentary. He studied the Gita, he imbibed the teachings of the Gita, and he transformed his knowledge of the Gita into action. Just like what Krishna says in the Gita, that we have the right to perform action, but not the right to the fruits of the action. Netaji clearly understood the teaching of the Gita, and he performed the actions required to liberate India. In 1956, there was a meeting between Justice P.V. Chakrabarti, who was the Chief Justice of Calcutta High Court and was serving as the acting governor of West Bengal. He had written a letter to the publisher of R.C. Majumdar's book. R.C. Majumdar is a historian who wrote a book titled A History of Bengal. So, in that letter, P.B. Chakrabarti has mentioned about his meeting with Clement Attlee. Clement Attlee was the Prime Minister of Britain when India got its so-called independence. So during that meeting, P.V. Chakrabarti inquired from Clement Attlee, since Gandhi's Quit India movement had tapered off quite some time ago, and in 1947, no such new compelling situation had arisen that would necessitate a hasty British departure, why did they had to leave? In his reply, Attlee cited several reasons, the main among them being the erosion of loyalty to the British Crown among the Indian Army and Navy personnel as a result of the military activities of Netaji. So this was Attlee's reply. Whether it was in World War I or even in World War II, the manufactured Mahatma, he always wanted Indians to fight for the British in the war. But Netaji wanted Indians to fight against the British. Ironically, that manufactured Mahatma who wanted Indians to die for the British, he is being viewed as the greatest freedom fighter. So he was not a Mahatma, he was a completely confused Atma, and he also had the tendency to confuse others always. But Netaji, being he was a much more knowledgeable person, and he was also a very spiritual person. So he had studied the Gita and he imbibed the knowledge of the Gita, and therefore he determined, he had the firm resolve that he should initiate the action to liberate India. And that's exactly what happened. Things did not really go as he had planned. However, the ultimate aim was achieved, though it was quite delayed, but it was achieved. Now, whenever we talk about this conversation between Attlee and P.V. Chakrabarti, many of the Italian mafia slaves, they would be saying that this is not a very reliable source. This is actually a secondary or tertiary source. So this cannot be taken as an evidence. But the cutest thing about the Italian mafia slaves is that they will always accept any source which glorifies the manufactured Mahatma or the manufactured Pandit. They won't be willing to accept any other source which glorifies the other true freedom fighters. So, in 1955, Ambedkar gave this interview to BBC. So, in that interview, he had told that from his own analysis, he had concluded that two things led the Labour Party to take the decision to free India. The national army that was raised by Subhash Chandra Bose, the British had been ruling the country in the firm belief that whatever may happen in the country or whatever the politicians do, they will never be able to change the loyalty of soldiers. That was one prop on which they were carrying on the administration. And that was completely dashed to pieces. They found that soldiers could be seduced to form a party, a battalion to blow off the British. So, the conversation between Attlee and P.B. Chakrabarti always gets dismissed as a secondary or tertiary source. But those who dismiss that source, they will also conveniently ignore this statement by Ambedkar. Very often, the slaves of the Italian mafia family, they only use Ambedkar's remarks, which are largely seen as anti-Hindu. Whatever anti-Hindu remarks Ambedkar has made, those are taken as gospel for them. But whenever it comes to facts like this, they will conveniently ignore. Another interesting fact is that Netaji was also the classmate of Srila Prabhupada. It is mentioned in Prabhupada Leelamrita. So even during their time in the college, even during that time, Prabhupada observed Netaji to be a very spiritual person. So they used to have discourses even about politics and also spiritual discourses. So as mentioned here, Prabhupada also liked Bose's faith in spirituality, his enthusiasm and determination. So it was Netaji who was the true liberator of India because he understood the teachings of Gita and he understood the importance of being engaged in action without being too obsessed in the fruits of action. Things did not really go as he had planned. However, freedom was achieved, though it was not complete freedom. As we saw in our previous session, in 1947, India was given dominion status. The main agenda was partition. So the two dominions were created. And ironically, the so-called freedom achieved on 15 August 1947, it came with the first LG of India was Lord Mountbatten. So even after the so-called independence, Mountbatten was holding a key position. So that was the kind of independence that was achieved by this so-called party of freedom fighters, the Congress party. But this was mainly because Netaji did not get cooperation from all the different freedom fighters. Still, he was willing to act and he was not always too obsessed about the fruits of his actions. And of course, he was never given the credit that was due to him. Only just recently. And it is also interesting to note that for quite some time in this canopy at India Gate in Delhi, this was occupied by the statue of King George V. Even in independent India, even in the so-called independent India, the statue of King George V was occupying this canopy. However, in 2022, 8 September 2022, this statue of Netaji was inaugurated. So it was the firm belief of Netaji that a soldier should have military training and also spiritual training. So he is one example of a political leader who was also spiritually enlightened. He completely understood the teachings of the Gita, and he understood the importance of um, being engaged in action. So he established the Azad Hind government, and things did not really go as he had planned, but still, ultimately, the supreme will of the Supreme Lord will prevail. So, at least the British were out of India in 1947, and at least now, Netaji is getting his due. So, unlike the two personalities that we have discussed about in our previous sessions, the manufactured Mahatma and the manufactured Pandit, Netaji is one example of a political leader who at least understood the Gita, and he also demonstrated through his actions. However, for us as devotees, we should be more focused on our spiritual goal, because even for a person like Netaji, despite all his efforts, uh, there were more people from his own motherland. They are the ones who actually backstabbed him. So, as Krishna says, this is Dukkalayam, and therefore it is wiser if we focus on our spiritual goals. And even in our spiritual journey, we have the rights of action. Therefore, we should always follow the instructions of our Acharya so that we can go to Goloka, back to Gaudi. So that's all for today. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, so we'll meet again next week. Hare Krishna.